All right, hello all. We're going to jump into the Microeconomics Chapter 6 lecture, which is based on consumer choices. So like I explained earlier, this is the first time we get a divergence between the micro and the macro textbooks. So we will be focusing on purely microeconomic concepts and philosophies and stuff of that sort. So here we go. Consumer choices, if you want to pause this and pull out your Chapter 6 notes, which I posted a few minutes ago. Feel free and I'll dive right in. Okay, so we talked about marginal utility earlier. The idea, I think there was a Chapter 2 or 3. This is just the idea that as you consume more of a particular product, economists assume that your utility from consuming each additional product is reduced, right? So your first piece of candy that you eat is going to be highly beneficial. You're going to get a lot of enjoyment out of it, a lot of utility out of it in the economic parlance. But once you get to piece of candy number 63, your utility is reduced drastically, right? I mean, it's like, okay, this is really starting to get old. Yes, it tastes good, but my stomach's starting to hurt, these sorts of things. So, you always get more pleasure, the assumption is, out of the first piece than out of the last. So here they want to show how marginal utility is calculated and how we can compare relative marginal utilities given a choice set. So in the graphic in Chapter 6, the choice set is between t-shirts and movies. I think it's Jorge or Jose needs to make a decision between what combination of these products, t-shirts and movies, should he purchase, and how will he derive the maximum amount of utility from the combination of choices. And they lay it out here this is table 6.3 table 6.2. They lay out each product, t-shirts and movies, the total utility that you will get by adding up each one of these, and then the marginal utility of each additional unit consumed, right? So if we're looking at the t-shirt category, if you have one t-shirt, you get a total utility of 22 and a total marginal utility of 22, right? Because you're moving from 0 to whatever the utility is. Whatever your benefit is. But once you move from t-shirt number 1 to t-shirt number 2, now you already have a t-shirt and maybe you could have done something better with that. You derive, a negligible marginal amount less utility out of the second t-shirt. So your marginal utility moved from a 22 to a 21. But if you look at sort of the 8th possible t-shirt that you could buy, which is your maximum given your allotment of your budget. Once you look there, you see that your marginal utility is a mere 10, and so you're moving from originally a 22 utility to a marginal utility of 10 at the eighth consumption. And it's the same for movies, right? You move from a total utility of 16 to 100. But your marginal utility for movies, the first one you derive 16. I don't know, wonderful units. I don't know what they call this. They call it a util in the book. Kind of a weird concept. It's just your benefit, right? Your marginal benefit. What joy are you deriving out of this? We would put a monetary number on it if we could, like a dollar amount. But here they just want you to understand the concept that you're deriving some sort of benefit, right? So if you move from your first movie ticket wherein you derive a 16 utility to your 8th movie ticket wherein you only derive a 9 utility, you see that your marginal utility is reducing over time. By the time you get to your 8th movie, you're kind of tired of this. You've probably had enough popcorn. And so maybe a t-shirt will be a better idea, right? And so if you look at the graphic, oh man, it looks like I forgot to add the graphic, but in the book, if you look at the graphic and you're moving from the different points, they plot the points out here. So if you move from 4 t-shirts and 0 movies, you only have an 81 utility, right? This is table 6.3. Whereas when you move up to S at your maximum utility, you have a 22 utility derived from a single t-shirt, and 81 overall utility from your 6 movie tickets, and this is the absolute maximum amount of utility if you plotted it on a graph. And so this would be our equilibrium choice, right? This is the most efficient economic choice given the constraints of the problem. The price of t-shirts versus the price of movie tickets, and the utility that you derive from each product, and the marginal utility that you derive from each product. So when you work through all of this, you find that your most optimal choice, given that your budget and all of these constraints, is at point S, wherein you derive 103 utils. Okay? It's sort of a foreign concept, but we're just trying to get you to think about the idea that we can sort of plot on a map how much benefit we get from each product, and then we can come to a sort of equilibrium point on a graph, right? Okay. Again, keep in mind here that it's very important that you remember this is marginal utility, right? We're not as concerned with total utility. We want to know what the marginal utility, what those changes in the margin lead to. Okay, and so they work out some of these problems here, right? They suggest, okay, we're going to put a price on these different products. A t-shirt costs $14, and a movie ticket costs $7. So this is probably like 1996, when people could afford a movie. And if you plot out the marginal utility of each increasing product purchase, what you'll find is that you actually derive the most utils per buck, right? The most benefit per dollar on your very first movie ticket. So here we're looking at table 6.5. And if you look at table 6.5, you see that your first t-shirt gets you a util per dollar of 1.6. Whether that's high or low, we don't know. We have to compare it to something, right? And so we're comparing it to the marginal utility, or the utils per dollar of a movie ticket. And if you look at the first row here if you buy your first movie ticket, wherein you derive 16 marginal utility at $7 a pop, it's about a 2.3 utils per dollar. And so that's much more than the 1.6 for the t-shirts. And so we will purchase our first movie ticket, and then our second, because it's also higher than the 1.6 of the first t-shirt, and our third, and our fourth, and our fifth movie tickets, right? So we will have 5 movie tickets in our hand before we even ever consider buying a t-shirt, under the auspices of these economic models, because you get more marginal utility per buck. You get more bang out of your buck. You get more joy per dollar spent out of these first 5 movie tickets than you would out of your first t-shirt. But then once you hit your 6th movie ticket, wherein your marginal utility per buck is at 1.6 and is equivalent with that first t-shirt, you will buy both of those products simultaneously, basically. And then you will keep moving on, but at that point you'll be out of money, right? And so the calculation is suggesting that you'll buy the first 6 movie tickets and that 1 t-shirt, wherein they balance out at that marginal utility per dollar of 1.6. I hope that makes sense. I know it's there's a lot of numbers going on, so rewind it if you're having trouble, and if you're still having trouble, reach out to me, okay? Okay, and the book says, like we've been talking about, you maximize your utility per buck when the marginal utility of A equals the marginal utility of B. When they're not equal, you will prefer one product to another, right? And you'll just buy product A, until it matches out. And then you'll be at that marginal utility experience point, okay? I've got highlighted in red here the discussion of the assumptions behind quantifying utility and the burdens of this assumption, but we're actually going to touch on that at the end of the chapter. So we're going to skip over that and move to section 6.2, and then we'll sort of loop back around, all right? Okay, so we're going to move to section 6.2, how do changes in income or price affect consumption choices, right? And so if you look at this figure 6.3, you've got this nice little graph, which again, is two different products, right? And we have to choose this time between concert tickets and overnight stays, or I think they said it was like a bed and breakfast or something. And so we need to know, at this point, we are at point M, which is the maximization of the marginal utility for both products. It's like 8 concert tickets and 4 overnight bed and breakfast stays, right? But they want to make a point that our income is changing, right? We're doubling our income and we're pushing our income frontier out from that first line where M is on to the point, to the line where P, N, and Q are on, right? You see that? So our income is increasing. We're now going to get to make a new choice about the confluence of purchases between concert tickets and weekend stays at a bed and breakfast, okay? And so we have to determine whether we want to be at P or N or Q. And they just sort of want to get you thinking about the idea that, okay, once you push that frontier out, we got to make new choices, right? There's also the idea here that, okay, that one is about income, right? Everything is shifting out. Your whole possibilities frontier is being shifted farther to the right in the case of an income increase, or to the left if you get a pay reduction, right? And then you'll have to make some other hard choices. I guess it would be a lot better to be choosing, well, which one do I want more of rather than what do I want less of. So if you move on from that figure 6.3 to figure 6.4, rather than an income change, now we're getting a price change, right? And so in this one, I wish they would just keep all the examples synonymous. It's very frustrating. But this time now we're comparing cameras with baseball bats. Who buys a camera anymore? I don't know. We live in the digital age. But I guess you've got sort of maybe a sports photographer, and he has to decide, do I want another camera or do I want to add another baseball bat to my collection, right? But what they're saying is that the baseball bat companies have decided to increase the price of their baseball bats. Maybe wood is becoming more difficult to find, or who knows. But the price of bats is increasing. So our sort of utility line, or excuse me, our relation line in the choice between the purchase of cameras and baseball bats in figure 6.4 is going to shift downward, right? And so we can still afford the same maximum number of cameras because the price didn't change, but now it shifts inward a little bit because we can no longer afford the same amount of baseball bats, right? It's a silly example, but we have to make a decision about whether we want to, where on this H to L line now we want to move our decision, right? Okay, but there are some typical responses to higher prices, which they sort of discuss in the books. You will generally, of course, buy fewer of the good whose price has increased, right? You've generally already made these marginal utility calculations under the assumptions of economics and the assumptions of sort of maximal or optimization of efficiency, these sorts of things, right? And so as an individual, you should have already made these calculations about I want 2 cameras and 12 baseball bats, right? And now the price of baseball bats increases, and the general response to this is that we simply buy fewer baseball bats, right? But it can have a rippling in the market. It can affect lots of other things in the market, right? There are thousands and maybe even millions of moving pieces going on in the market all the time that are sort of bumping up against each other and affecting prices and influencing supplies and logistics and all of these sorts of things. But in general, when a price increases, you're simply going to decrease the number of purchases there. So just remember that. It's pretty simple. This also tends to happen with inflation, right? So it's not really that you can't afford the number of bats you decided to buy. It's that the number of bats is stretching your income in a sense, right? It's not that our income reduced and now we can't buy as many bats. It's that our income is worth less now. And so this is the same concept that happens when you have inflationary tendencies in a society. People are having to make very difficult decisions, not because their income has been reduced, but because their money is worth far less. And so now the same product costs you a lot more dollars, and it's a really difficult thing. We saw in Weimar Germany under hyperinflation, they would literally collect barrels, wheelbarrows full of money and burn them because the money was worth less than actual wood. And so that's the sort of concept we're talking about here. Inflation, just because you're making the same $10,000 in the American context, if your $10,000 today is only worth $1,000 tomorrow, even though it's the same $10,000, we're in trouble. We're going to have to reduce the number of products that we buy, right? So the income effect, the idea that a price of a product is reducing the amount purchased, just remember that there's sort of a connection there to inflation as well. Just when value of money decreases, it's almost like raising prices, right? Okay, so if we move on to figure 6.5, the foundations of a demand curve. So at point 0 in the A graph, or the sort of P0 line, that's the original housing price, right? That's your apartment cost $1,000 a month, right? And then as you start to increase the price of, and I shouldn't even say your apartment, I should say the square foot of the average apartment costs $20 a square foot or whatever per annum. That's what's going to change. And so as that square footage cost increases, you not only see the line sort of shifting inward as it did earlier with I think it was baseball bats, but you're also seeing the quantity of housing reduced, right? People are starting to get out of the market because you have an inelastic demand, or as the prices for housing increase, you should get a lower quantity of housing on the market as people start to sort of move elsewhere or look for cheaper housing, these sorts of things. And so as you map this out from Q0 to Q4, it's also trying to show you that you can map that out on a demand curve, and so that these increments in price changes can be laid out on a graph to show you a demand curve and where the quantity of a certain product should be set under a certain price regime, right? I guess I should also touch on, right now we're talking about micro, right? About how small changes in the economy can affect individuals' decisions, right? But I just wanted to touch on the idea that this can also happen to businesses or governments. If you sort of look at the world as a system rather than right now we're probably looking at like the American economy and how do individuals react in the American economy. If we look at the global economy, we can actually look at firms or states sort of the same way that we do individuals on the micro level. So keep that in mind. Some of these concepts are applicable at a more macro level. Because we're almost looking at those, say, a sovereign state as an individual, right, on the aggregate global scale. So some of these are sort of interchangeable concepts, and changing prices of, say, healthcare is going to have effect on how government decides to spend money, sort of like it would on how an individual would spend money. So it doesn't work across the board for every situation, and that's why we have two different courses, of course. But sometimes you can think about the way that price changes or global factors influence the thinking, sort of quote unquote, the thinking of a state, right? Okay, on to the next section. We'll move on to section 6.3, labor and leisure choices. I really like this 6.7, this figure 6.7 graph. We're starting to finally get into the idea of curves, right? And curvilinear relationships. Not all relationships are straight line or are just one direction. And a lot of like development literature in political science is curvilinear relationships, right? And here, when we're looking at the relationship between the wages that you are paid as an individual and the hours that you are willing to work, there is also sort of a curvilinear relationship where the people at the bottom, we get the people who are, I shouldn't even say the people at the bottom, this group, this red circle at the bottom where higher wages equate to more hours worked. These are generally the part-time workers, teenage workers. Maybe they're sort of like the stay-at-home mom type who wants to get into the labor force a little bit to make some extra income to bring into the home, this sort of thing. So for that set of people, higher wages will equate to more hours worked. In the next red circle, we have higher wages really doesn't have any effect, right? It's stable. So you increase their wages, they're still going to work their 45 hours a week. And this is sort of the mid-management set, the bureaucratic government set, the sort of middle class salary type of job, right? Regardless of what you're paying me, the number of hours that I work are sort of inelastic. I live the family life. I have to be home at a certain time. I sort of, get here at 7:30 and leave at 5:30, and you pay me my 40-hour salary. Maybe I'll stay a couple hours extra if I've got a big project or something, but my higher salary isn't really going to affect the number of hours I work. And then lastly, at the very top level, that final red circle, you have the subset of people where if you pay them more, they work less. And this is the sort of the white collar professional set, doctors, maybe veterinarians, the stock market set, maybe professors. These are just people who are like, look, I have a really nice standard of life already. If you're just going to increase my income, maybe I'm just going to go play more golf. I mean, you're not really going to affect me at the top level. So just keep in mind that, again, we're talking about marginal changes. Some sort of change in the system doesn't affect everyone or the whole scale the same. So we need to start thinking about how subsets are affected and marginal changes and diminishing utility and things of this sort, right? Marginal utility. It's a weird way to start thinking, right? It's a strange way, but we do it naturally all the time. We also do these sort of consumer set problems all the time. I know it seems really silly and stupid to be like, Jose can choose between 4 movies and 8 baseball bats, and what does he choose? It is silly, and it's a little bit obnoxious, but it's a way for us to start building models of how people think. It's a way to conceptualize and quantify the way that human thought patterns sort of work naturally. I know we're not doing all of this, like we're not writing down a little graph to determine the marginal utility between baseball bats and whatever else you want to buy, but we sort of do make these calculations in our everyday life. All the time. We're making marginal utility calculations. Would I rather prefer this or this? Should I save this money, or should I throw it in the bank, or should I go buy myself a bottle of booze, or what am I doing with this money, or should I put it in my daughter's college fund? Like there's a million different choices you can make all the time. And not all of that money is set on something. Most of it is, right? You got your rent and your electricity or your bills or your student loans or whatever sort of bills you have. But there's always some subset of money generally that you have a choice about what you spend it on. And as silly as these calculations in this chapter are, it is sort of the natural experience that humans go through. Not always, though, and we'll talk about it at the end, like I mentioned earlier. Okay. I thought this was a really cool graph, this Clear It Up graph, table 6.8, the average number of hours worked cross-nationally. The United States is really up there. We're only about a half a week in front of Spain, maybe, what does it look like? About 60 hours, so a week and a half beyond Japan. But when you look at, like, France, right, we are 400 hours. That's 10 work weeks that we work extra in the United States compared to France, and they think they are living a normal life and working hard. We have a strange sense of what is expected of us in America. And for the most part, other OECD countries don't work nearly as much as we do in the United States. Nor are they as productive, though. So there's a trade-off, right? United States is generally the most productive per hour worked. So not only are we putting in a lot more hours, but we're producing more per hour. Are we workaholics or not? That's sort of up to you, but the table is rather indicative. Okay, section 6.4, intertemporal choices in financial markets. This is just the idea that, look, another thing that influences, another variable, I shouldn't say thing, right? It's so lazy. Another variable that influences financial capital choices and markets and savings rates and all kinds of different stuff is just simple time, right? How does the economy look at today versus a year ago versus 10 years ago versus 100 years ago? You get massive fluctuations, right? And this figure 6.8 is pretty indicative of that, of the percentage of personal savings over time. So if you look at the peak, which looks like around 1982, you're looking at about approximately a 10% savings rate of personal income, whereas if you look at the nadir, which means the low point, by the way, I love words, you're looking at about a 1.7% savings rate of personal income. And this is something that a lot of economists and even sort of what do they call these guys? The personal financial planning subset, economic set, have been suggesting is a real serious problem in the near to the medium to long term, right? Especially if you sort of scroll down and you look at table 6.10, which is the GDP as a percentage, savings as a percentage of GDP. China is saving literally half of their economic output goes towards savings. The United States is only at 17%. That's $1 in $6 goes to saving for the future. So that is a massive, massive difference. That is China's saving 3 times more as a percentage-wise than America. And so especially if you look at our Social Security system and the fact that our Social Security system is just near bankrupt and running out of money quickly, this could be a real problem. Americans aren't saving for the future, and if our Social Security system collapses outright, there's going to be a serious issue. And so this is something that politicians have been sort of putting off for like the last 30 years. But everybody knows that this is a real problem, and that we need to either increase wages at the bottom to help with the savings rate by giving people more expendable income to be able to put into savings, or we need a sort of information campaign to teach people about savings, or we need to tax and set up a real Social Security system, because none of those things are really happening right now. And eventually, a lot of just elderly people who just didn't plan are going to be SOL. And so it's concerning, All right. All right. I think that's about it for the chapter, but I do want to discuss the issues, right? This is some of my favorite discussions of these issues, and I really like having discussions about these in class. There are a litany of problems with economic models. There's just a lot. One of them is all the assumptions. You're just assuming that humans act rationally, that humans can rationally calculate and quantify their utility from particular expenditures, that they will act on those rational instincts or rational calculations, and that they even can sort of quantify things like that. That's problematic. People do act irrationally, quote unquote, according to sort of the strictures of economics, right? People donate, don't really get anything from it. People are altruistic. Soldiers will jump on a grenade and die for their friends. There are human behaviors that can't really be explained easily by rational choice models, and if they can be explained by rational choice models, by just simply sort of washing it away by saying, well, it was in their maximal beneficial utility, why was it their maximal beneficial? Like, if you can explain anything away that way, then it doesn't really explain anything, right? If you could just say, well, every action is due to their maximal benefit, benefit maximization. Well, that doesn't explain anything, right? It's not falsifiable. It's not testable. And so if you could explain anything with a theory, then it's not a theory. It's just hogwash, right? And so that's one of the problems with economic models. One of the complaints, at least. Another is future discounts, right? If you look at what we just talked about, savings rates, it's a real problem, is that we're maximizing today's utility at the cost of our future self. Even though we would probably get more utility in the long run because our money will have added up to more, we will get more pleasure, our money will be far more valuable because it's growing over time. So in a sense, we're giving up a lot in the future for very little today, but we're constantly making this calculation as a society. And most of Western society is sort of making this calculation and discounting the benefits or the pain that they will go through in the future for the short-term sort of myopic benefits of today. And that's a serious problem with economic theory as well. It doesn't make a lot of sense. The third is quantifying utility, right? How do you say that I'm going to get 22 utils out of a t-shirt, right? It's a really weird way to think about things. You can also start saying, like, there are some really weird implications from this, right? Is murder, do you derive utility and benefit from murder if you're a sociopath, right? And is there rational choice, because they receive so much utility from this murder, to murder? That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, right? And so it's part of that puzzling problem of, look, wait, I can explain anything with this theory. So that's something else to watch out for, right? It's you can write off a lot of really bizarre actions through just the idea of, well, I received some utility from it, so it makes sense to me. That's problematic. You also have the behavior of individuals being wildly different for the same sort of utility, right? Let's say watching a football game. I derive a massive amount of utility from watching a football game because it's my love. I've spent most of my life around football. My brother played in the NFL. It's something I do every single weekend, and I'm devastated when football season is over. My girlfriend could care less about football. She gets no utility from watching football. And so there's the real problem of how do we go about quantifying these things when everyone's utility schedule is wildly different. I don't know. That's a very difficult thing to do. At the aggregate level, it works, right? Because we're just talking about average behavior. But at the individual level, it's much more problematic because now we can't talk about average behavior. Right now, we're talking about what does every individual do, and individuals react very differently to different stimuli. So that's a difficulty with the theory. There's also the assumption of self-control and utility assessment, which we touched on a little bit. How do you offer the number of utils per movie ticket versus t-shirt? Like, it's pretty silly, right? And in some sense, we're doing these calculations in our head, like, oh man, all my t-shirts have a hole in them. I really need a new t-shirt. I can forego a movie. But it's difficult and it's weird to say that we can just sort of slap a number on it. And I get that. I really do. Self-control is also a problem, right? People have addictions and they do things that are detrimental, highly detrimental to their actual utility. Heroin addicts, right? You're getting some benefit out of shooting up heroin, but like, is that really in your best interest? Are you maximizing your interest, your efficiency, or utility, or whatever you want to call it? There are real moral and even economic arguments that would say, no, that doesn't make sense, right? The people who buy cigarettes every week. I smoked for 20 years. I've finally given it up. Woo! The people who buy cigarettes, if you buy a pack a day of cigarettes, it's $7 a week. That's about $2,600 a year. For what? Like, yes, you are fulfilling some sense of utility and you are getting some benefit out of it, right? Because you're satisfying this craving that your body is generating. But is that maximizing your utility? No, I don't think so. And if you argue that it is, you're hard pressed to explain why, right? So there are lots of problems with these models, and we will talk about problems and things to watch for all throughout the semester, because I think it's very important that you know what these problems are so that you can talk to others about them. But again, don't simply just throw it all away, right? Don't throw away the baby with the bathwater, because there are useful things that we can learn by making these assumptions, building out models, understanding average human behaviors, things of that sort, right? We'll never understand how a psycho murderer's brain works. Like, yeah, it's like someone will, but it's probably not going to be economists. And so it's also sort of a problem that I even bring up that problem because it's so individualized. But it is a problem, right? There's some sense that, wait, you can't explain some cases out there using this approach. So just be careful, know what the problems are, but also know what the benefits are, which we've discussed too. So I hope you enjoyed the lecture. I hope you enjoyed the little discussion at the end. I hope you're all being happy and healthy and keep working hard, and I will see you soon. All right? Have a great day.